Thank you so much, Katja, for joining me. First question, you've been to Chalk Valley before. What do you think of the festival this year, and also why do you think history festivals like this are so important?
I think it's really great because it opens up all types of history to everyone, so it doesn't matter if you're bringing your kids and you want, sword fights or, medieval cooking or whatever you're interested in, or if you want to come to a formal lecture, it's kind of all here together, so there's something there for everybody. It really makes history accessible and exciting, and maybe you kind of come across things that you didn't know you were interested in before, and you kind of just see something going on, so you stop and have a look, and I just think it's a great format.
Amazing. And now you're here talking about your new book, and it's got elements of personal history in there because you grew up in East Germany. Particularly the last chapter, it really focuses on the personal element of that. How did you find that as a historian, approaching all the research for that and kind of blending it with your family's history?
It was really strange because I didn't set out to write the book as kind of like a memoir or anything like that, and it isn't. It's a history of East Germany as a country, rather than my experience in East Germany. I was only 4 when the Berlin Wall fell, so my memories are rather dim, and there's only a few of them. But I felt it was important to make it clear kind of what my own background is, where I come from when I look at that history. And it sort of added an element of personal curiosity on top of my academic curiosity. So there's this element where I was born in this country, but I didn't really see it as an adult and didn't really have very clear kind of memories or experiences of it. And therefore, it's kind of me as an adult, as a historian, returning to something that I felt I should know, but I didn't, if that makes sense. Kind of thinking about what was this country actually like that I was born into and that I didn't experience myself.
Yeah. So it must have been amazing to kind of go back and find out all these things that you didn't actually know, and kind of your own sense of identity in a way.
And it also explained a lot of the stuff that other people were telling me. So, when you grow up with people who are older than you, like your parents, your neighbors, your teachers, and they all tell you these things that they experience in the country that you were born in, but you don't really quite get it, if you know what I mean. So you try and understand what they actually talk about when they say in the GDR this and that happened. So that also put a little bit of context around kind of why the people around me were the way that they were and why they said the things that they said.
Oh, amazing. So can you just paint a picture for us of what life was really like in East Germany? Because I think people have a lot of misconceptions and preconceptions about what life was like, kind of a very bleak picture. But you also focus on a lot of the cultural elements. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Well, I think it completely depends what it was like, who you ask. I mean, this is like somebody asking you what's life like in Britain, and you'll say, well, it's very different if you're, a coal miner in the north, or if you work in the city as a banker. And I think that's the same in the GDR, and that's the element that people are missing, is that it wasn't a uniform experience. But people had very different lives in the GDR. Most of the time we tend to focus on East Berlin and on the kind of separation stories, people that couldn't kind of see their relatives in the West, and that is a part of that history. But it's a country that is larger than that, and that had people in it that did other things. And so I try and focus on culture, on work life, on what was it actually like to be, say, a factory worker in Leipzig, or a farmer somewhere in the north. It's about kind of diversifying the picture rather than kind of completely moving away from what was there.
Mm. And was there a particular aspect or story from the book that you really enjoyed researching more than anything else?
I think all the personal stories. It was really quite fascinating speaking to people about things that they experience themselves, because when you look into history, that's kind of longer ago. So my first book was about the 19th century, and obviously you can't go and ask people about that. Whilst this one, people tell you all these little anecdotes, and it's kind of trivial things that wouldn't appear in the history books or in the documents. Like if somebody tells you, what it was like to go after work and play in the football club that actually belonged to the factory that they worked in, and there's those kinds of things that wouldn't appear in the newspapers or in kind of a history book, in a traditional history book, and just hearing from the people who lived through that time themselves what it was like to live there. I think that was the personal highlight for me.
Do you feel a sense of responsibility then to kind of get these stories down on paper so that they're recorded for future generations?
I think I do. I mean, there's an element there. A lot of that is done, but it's usually done with a very specific group of people, namely those who were either in opposition to the regime or kind of severely repressed by the government and ended up in prisons or trying to leave the GDR. And that is an important element of it, but there is kind of, I'd say, about 90% of the population who lived their lives, got on with their lives and kind of did other things, and that's missing. These people would never put their hands up and say to an archive, you know, I was there, I'm a witness, I want to give you my testimony, because that's not how they see it, that's their life. So I think there's an element there whilst they're still around, especially older people who can tell you about the 1950s or even beforehand, the 1940s, late 1940s. Who won't be there forever, and kind of at least having some representation of their kind of perspectives, I think, is important.
Mm-hmm. And finally, can you give us an idea of how your book has been received in Germany?
It's very controversial. There's now a thing called the Hoyer debate, which is apparently a thing, I've been told. It's in the bestseller list, so it's being read, and has been since the beginning. But there is a group of people, particularly victims of the regime and people who feel that you cannot talk about the GDR as kind of a more normal state than people think, without hurting these people's feelings and kind of taking away from their experience. That's how they feel about it. They're very protective about the way that they talk about the GDR as a state of oppression, and they think kind of you're doing that an injustice by saying actually there's also this person who did something else with their lives. And that's kind of what the debate's about. Like, is it okay to talk about the GDR in the way that I do? Where some people say yes, others say no. But I'm also getting emails from like East Germans almost on a daily basis who sort of send me their little snippets of kind of life stories and things and say, you know, if only you'd asked me, I could have told you about this, that and the other. Or they say, I found myself kind of reflected in this particular chapter of the book. So it clearly has got some sort of resonance with the people there as well, because something like that also doesn't exist in Germany.
Well, maybe you need to write another book where you collect all of those stories that people have been sending you.
That's kind of the suggestion I'm getting from lots of people, sort of to say like almost like an anthology of like East German stories or something along those lines.
Oh, well, that's an amazing note to end it on. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me, and I hope you enjoy the festival.
Thank you.